Everybody, welcome back to Pragmatic Presence podcast. I have an amazing guest with me today, Alice Paine. I don't even know where to start introducing this person, but I would love, in your own words, for Alice, for you to just give us a little bit about your background. But yeah, feel free to take the stage and then we'll get into it.
Thank you so much, Johnny, and thank you so much for inviting me to your podcast. I know that you're somebody who takes communication of your ideas and your values very seriously, and so to be invited into that space feels like such a huge honour. So I am, like you say, there's lots of things I could say. I'm a full-time scientist, so currently a post-doctoral researcher at the University of Basel. I study the interactions between the climate and volcanoes and the environment over the past 2 million years, using geochemistry, the geochemistry of like lake sediments, stalagmites, all that sort of thing. Basically trying to read the record of the Earth that it's left us over these, the past 2 million years or so. Then I'm also, so yeah, it's a bit slightly unconventional. And then also I am the community manager of PropaneBusiness, which is a company, but that's actually how I met Johnny. We met through the PropaneBusiness program. I'm the community manager, so I keep tabs on questions and sort of help to create the environment that we want people to sort of flourish and grow their businesses and themselves in. And so those are kind of the two main things that I do. I've also, been a freelance artist. I'm a qualified sort of personal trainer, and so that was at one stage I was working as a PT. Currently a CrossFit athlete, and yeah, those are kind of, like I say, those are the main sort of things that I do really.
Incredibly talented, and one thing I really like is out of all those things, I think it's really cool how you create the environment in Propane, and you're really interested in the environment of the Earth. Those two things, would you say did that happen by accident or?
Yes, it kind of did and kind of didn't. So it happened by accident in the sense that I was doing my PhD down in Oxford back in 2021, which is when I started working for Propane. And ultimately, PhDs in the UK don't pay very much money at all. It really is like a job that you do because you love it and not necessarily because it'll earn you a lot of money. And I was like, I had a point where I realised that I didn't have enough money to pay my rent and also live for the next 3 months. And so I thought, okay, so I need to get a job. And funnily enough, Johnny and Youssef had put out a call on their social media saying we're looking for a content manager at the time, which is basically just posting. That was at the time just posting on their Instagram and sort of doing their sort of content moderation. And so I thought, that sounds fair. That sounds solid enough. I'll do that. And then got lucky enough to get the job, and then my role kind of with them evolved into the community manager role. And actually, the more I got into that area, or at least the more I got in, sort of immersed myself in that role, the more I realised actually how much crossover there was between the world of academia and science and the world of community management. And actually, they've proved to be linked in so many different ways, really. And so it's kind of by accident, but it was from doing my PhD that led me to Propane. So it's a sort of tenuous link there.
Yeah, like a happy accident, if you will. Call it
Exactly.
synchronicity, whatever. But yeah, the main thing is that it happened.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so many of the things you do are probably over my head and many people's. I guess but you are currently working on the SNS. So the SNSF, is it Synergia Project, Holocene Hydroclimate, Draft Dynamics and Environmental Changes, recorded
Yes,
in multiple archives from Southwest Asia.
that's the one. Yes.
Amazing. Could you, before we go into more about you, could you just give me more about that in a nutshell? What is the main focus of that? Because I feel like I understand it on a very basic level, but
Yeah, yeah. It's one of those titles that you recognise words, but then all put together, it's kind of like it's not immediately clear what it's about. So it's funded by the Swiss National Science Foundation in Switzerland. Here they put a lot of emphasis on science, and particularly environmental science. So science is going to help us understand how the Earth works and ultimately how we can best prepare for the future from study of the Earth and its past and that sort of thing. And so the project that I'm working on is essentially looking to reconstruct the climate of Southwest Asia, so mainly Iraq, Iran, Turkey, Afghanistan, Syria, these kinds of regions, reconstructing what hydroclimate has done there over the past 10,000 years or so, because as we all know, it's a very complex part of the world, and as a result, science there has been extremely limited, and
Yeah.
yet you combine that as well with the fact that it's a region that's climatologically very, very complex. So you've got the convergence of different air masses from Siberia, from the Mediterranean, from North Africa, and sort of from the Tibetan Plateau and that sort of Asian region as well. So you've got a convergence of all these air masses creating incredibly complex climate signals that don't necessarily follow what we may expect from other regions. And so the whole purpose of our project is to use stalagmites collected from caves in these regions and looking at their geochemistry and seeing what that can tell us about things like where the rainfall has come from, how much rainfall there was, what the sort of how that affected the soils and erosion in the regions, and ultimately how closely it relates to what we would expect to see on a global scale. So, for example, if you have signals in the North Atlantic over this period, which are very, very well understood for the past 10,000 years, how similar are they to that? And if they're different, why could they be different? What are the factors that are driving those differences? And so that's the kind of the main premise. And then ultimately, with that knowledge, we can then better understand the climate of the region and help to prepare for a future where a lot we would expect there to be a lot more extreme events in the wake of climate change. People tend to have this assumption that climate change is solely just the earth getting hotter. And so when places get colder, people think, oh, it doesn't exist, it's not a thing. But then actually climate change is multifaceted. So it means that certain regions may experience heating and cooling, but then places like Southwest Asia are more likely to experience hydroclimate extremes, so flash flooding, droughts, and more extreme manifestations of these. So the more we understand how they occurred in the past and what drove those events in the past, means that we can then take this knowledge, superimpose the effect of humans onto that, and get a better idea of what we can expect when we combine those natural and human forcings.
Yeah, yeah, that's incredible and fascinating as well. Like, I think you've taught me about five lessons in like three sentences there. Obviously, a very basic level of understanding. I mean, but yeah, that you really, yeah, I think you're good at synthesizing complex things as well.
Oh,
I've
thank
seen
you.
that a million times in the community, so there's definitely a crossover there. Yeah, and for anyone wondering why I was struggling to get my words out there, because I've got this big bio of everything Alice has done above me, and I was trying to get the words out while, yeah. But yeah, thank you for that, Alice. So just while we're on the topic, you might get asked this a lot, but I'm going to make the most of the opportunity because I don't get to ask many people who are truly informed and educated on this. You're one of the few people I'd probably trust with this question. So what would you say as a response? I'm not one of them, to people who say climate change isn't real and that it's, like leaning into, I use this word loosely, but the conspiracies or maybe being just flippant on the topic. Um,
Yeah, and I'm not. I'm never get sick of people asking me this question because ultimately, it's like an opportunity to explain myself, right? And I think ultimately it's a question that comes from a lack of understanding, not necessarily a want of just to be difficult. When I hear the question, the expression, or at least when I hear perspectives that are from the case of climate change isn't real, to me, I immediately see a human desire to make sense of a world where things don't feel very understood. And the climate is something that, arguably, this is partly the fault of scientists, like myself, in that we're not always very good at communicating what we do. So, for example, I can say, oh, I use, the trace elements and geochemistry and isotopes to understand rainfall. People might be like, okay, cool, what of it? And with that inability, or at least that poor communication of what we find in our studies, into general language that can be understood, people are then left trying to find their own answers. And so when something like climate change is posed, which feels very scary, very out of our control, which it is, very global scale, it's far more sufficient, or far more, what's the word? It's far more sort of acceptable to the human mind and far more comforting for us to find value and at least to try to be able to explain things like this in the context of it's a conspiracy. It's other people trying to do this. That's the reason. And then you've got a clear reason as to why it is the way it is, rather than the actual reality, which is there's a lot about the climate system we do not understand still. Like there is so much we don't understand. That feels more scary. And to go into a world that feels very uncertain and feels like it's punctuated by an awful lot of extreme weather, extreme climate events, extreme change ultimately, because climate change, like I mentioned before, it's not just getting hotter, because then you kind of have the podcast bros, as I kind of call them, on their podcast saying things like, oh, well, we've reduced heat related deaths by, high percentage. That doesn't account for the fact that, yes, you may be able to whack your aircon if you're in America. What about the people further down in the equatorial regions who are suffering more climate extremes, who cannot live there anymore and have to migrate? So while it's very easy for us in the Western world to say, oh, it's a conspiracy or whatever, it's not even getting hot on what you're on about. And even if it is, less people are dying from the climate related issues, so it's fine. But how many more people are suffering because of this?
Yeah.
And ultimately, I think the ultimate solution to these conspiracy theories spreading and becoming more prevalent, because I understand why they appear, and I would never judge anybody for holding those, because like I say, to me, it's a very human response to a very uncertain future and a very scary, complex world.
Yeah.
But what I would say is, I think there needs to be a better bridging of the gap between science and the public, because I think once people understand their planet and understand what we know, what we don't know, it becomes far easier to then sort of subscribe to the scientific consensus. Because again, there's all these ideas of like us scientists being sort of sitting there cackling, rubbing our hands together, coming up with these wild conspiracies, and we're just trying to fool people. Same in medicine, like big pharma and all these sorts of things.
Yeah.
We're just people who are, underpaid really for what we do, who are just madly curious and want to know stuff and want to answer questions. And the more you know, the more you realize you don't know. And so we are going to be we're very always hesitant to speak in black and white certainty. But we want to talk about what we do. We want to share our ideas. And so rather than seeing science as a scary thing that's full of these conspiracies, I would just urge anybody who's feeling skeptical just to spend some time with a scientist, spend some time listening to scientists speak and see how they speak. Because the lack of absolutes, while it can feel scary, because nothing is absolute, actually that's a huge sign of something to be confident in, because people who speak with a bit more circumspection mean that they have a much broader perspective and they can consider multiple lines of evidence, which is what ultimately what what the climate crisis really needs. It's like considering climate change, you need to consider multiple angles, because yes, while heat-related deaths may be decreasing in the Western world, what about in poorer countries in the equatorial regions, for example? What about countries elsewhere? So it's lots of different things to consider, but it's a scary thing.
Yeah, and just what you mentioned there about it, one of the first human reactions to that type of thing, isn't it, is to, through fear, create separation and try and regain control. And that's two of the main reactions, right?
Yeah.
And I think another problem is as well, because there's so much information out there now, you can just so easily go and find confirmation for your own bias anywhere, can't you?
Absolutely. And it's something that I have to protect myself against as well, because sometimes you are so bought into an idea and a hypothesis, you're like, yeah, this is it. And of course, you can go out and find whatever. You can find data. I had a mentor once say to me, you can make data say whatever you want it to say with the right amount of tinkering.
Especially if you're intelligent enough to do so, right? Because data in itself is a science. Reading data is a science, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, I guess. And I also liked what you said there about like the more you learn, the less you realize you don't know, right? And you have to be open to every possibility until you are proven wrong. But even then, there's always going to be exceptions in everything, right? So for
Sure.
us, any of us, especially say like just a random guy like myself, for me to boldly claim this is the reason this happens to this globe when I've had such a short time on this planet with such a limited perspective, it's an easy trap to fall into, isn't it? So if you could give people advice to even just a few basics of how to identify where is a good place to get your facts from, the right type of people to listen to, what to maybe avoid, is there anything you could maybe advise on there?
I love this question. Firstly, don't listen to people like Jordan Peterson. um, yeah, I think that's a number one I'd say is if somebody is speaking on social media in black and white absolutes,
Yeah.
and if they are not climate scientists, I would be really hesitant to what they say. I'll give you a really clear example that really wound me up the other week. So Jordan Peterson, we all know him, probably a very intelligent guy, great in psychology. That's
Yeah.
what he's trained in. That's what he's spent thousands of dollars and many years studying.
Yeah.
He posted something about the climate crisis, and he posted a graph. It was a temperature reconstruction of the Earth's history. Essentially, it goes back 66 million years. So using um, like fossils on the marine beds of the oceans in marine sediments, using ice cores, tree rings, stalagmites, all these different tools. Climate scientists have essentially reconstructed what we think the Earth's temperature has been doing over the past 16 million years or so. And what it shows is that during the Carboniferous period, actually no, it goes further back than 66 million years. Either way, it goes back a really, really long time. And so what it shows is that there have been periods in the Earth's past where the Earth was a lot hotter on average and had a lot higher CO2 than it does now. You know, and to the point where it's like you look and go, oh, actually, we're quite low on this graph when you look at it over the full context. And this, Jordan Peterson was saying, look, the Earth has been hot before. It will, it doesn't matter. Heating is not an issue. Like, these conspiracies, all these sorts of things. Which, on the surface, if you don't study climate, you look at that and go, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, clearly it's been hotter in the past. We're not actually that bad. It's fine. What Jordan Peterson does not explain about this graph is the fact that the last time the Earth's climate had as much CO2 in the atmosphere, or more so in the atmosphere than we do now, humans didn't exist. The planet was too hot for mammals to really exist beyond being shrews. It was just too hot. There were dragonflies the size of small planes flying around.
Wow.
There were spiders bigger than our head. It was a world that was essentially swamp,
Yeah.
and where only reptiles and amphibians, so cold-blooded creatures, could survive. That was the last time the Earth was like this. We evolved as human beings on an ice age world, and so what that means is we evolved when there were as ice at the poles, when there were glaciers, when we evolved in a place where we were a lot colder. That's what allowed mammals, so hot-blooded creatures, to evolve, because the climate became cooler and we could therefore survive. If we let the planet heat up, we are creating an environment that is not suitable for human beings and not suitable for large mammals to live in. And it's context like that people on social media who don't necessarily understand the climate fail to realise is just how different the Earth was at these different stages. And while you can look at it as in absolutes and say, relative to this, we're fine right now. But it's like the Earth is going to do what the Earth's going to do. It's going to, ice ages happen, they go away. We have these, the Earth's climate itself on these timescales is driven by variations in the orbit, its orbit around the sun, its actual tilt. And so we can't control that. Whether we're here or not, that's going to happen regardless. But what we do is we are affecting the habitability of the planet. And if somebody is not trained in climate science, or even science in this context, they won't have all these other things to consider and think about. And so when you're looking for climate-related information, speaking in absolutes, number one, is, it's a big red flag because there's so much we don't know. I would be really hesitant to say, we definitely know this, or this is an absolute certain. I'm really hesitant to do that. And, it's all my colleagues, some of the most intelligent people I know, one of the most esteemed climate scientists, they will say I don't know more often than not.
That's usually a big sign of intelligence, of real intellect, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And so it's that ability to say I don't know, and I think it's anybody who is not trained in this field, I would be cautious. And equally also taking a step back and looking at what might be driving the individuals to post these things about the climate. If they're trying to drive clicks and they're optimizing for clicks and for engagement on social media, that's usually a red flag too, because ultimately science is not sexy. Science is not eye grabbing. Like it's just not. It's a very slow march towards what we feel is the truth. And sometimes we take 2 steps forward, 3 steps back because we realize we actually don't have that's actually wrong. And I heard Brian Cox, who does documentaries on the BBC, he said science is essentially just we are searching for how we're wrong. And that's a really nice way to put it. We're just essentially searching for how we are wrong. Whereas people who should not really be listened to are the ones who are searching for why they're right and proving why they're right. And so those are kind of the two main things I would say, because it's, there aren't very many websites that I can say go there for completely unbiased materials. Because I think people are going to see their own stuff on social media and they're going to be exposed to different things. And so I think it's more about giving the tools to recognize when stuff is, quite frankly, shite. Versus when it's, when it might be legitimate and it's worth considering. And also keeping in mind as well, just the last point is two things can be true at once, and especially when it comes to the climate. So for example, like I've just given, you might have, it's true, not all regions on Earth are warming up, but it might be that they have more flooding than they did before. So it might not be hotter, but it might be more extreme. There can be you can hold two truths at once. There are two things that can be true. It doesn't need to be, I'm in this camp versus that camp.
Absolutely. Yeah, very well said. And yeah, I mean, I'd love to know a little bit more about the person behind the work as well. Yeah, what brought you to falling in love with science? Was it something that was always in you, or did you discover it later, or how did that look for you?
So this might surprise quite a lot of people actually, but I hated science at school. I was a kid who I grew up telling myself the story that I was not very good at maths, and I do think that we are born either with tendencies towards words or numbers, or we feel more comfortable and at home with one of the two. I was very much at home with words. I used to love writing. I used to love that sort of thing, and I always thought I'd be an author. Maths, on the other hand, I used to struggle. Like I used to need extra tutoring from like the teachers at school to get basic times tables. Like my earliest memory is on every morning in our school we'd do a 100 times tables test where we had like a grid with times tables on, put a bit of tracing paper over the top, answer them, and then you'd have to read out your score out of 100. I was getting sub 10. Like it was awful. And so my mum said, okay, the day you get 100, you can get your ears pierced. And this was in like year 5. So in the UK, sort of like 10 years old or so. And I thought, right. And so I set myself this target of being able to get 100 in the times tables. And so I needed extra tutoring. I did some extra work. And so I got that. But that whole story to illustrate that I was not very good at maths. Equally science, I was never very good at, because it was all very, in school, it was all very sort of, there wasn't really a big purpose to it. It was kind of like you learned facts and that was it. And that didn't really appeal to me. I knew I loved the earth, and I knew I loved being outside. Like as I'm very lucky to grow up in sort of the rural part of the Pennines in the UK, and so spent more time outside than inside. To the point where in the summer we'd be like, oh, thank God it's summer, because we could stay out until 9 o'clock and it wasn't going dark. So I knew that I loved all that sort of thing. And so as a result, I kind of had this natural affinity to geography, and as well because the way it was laid out in school was because there was a lot of writing-based things and explaining how things worked and processes. And you couple that with it. Back in 2008, there was a program on the Channel 4 called Catastrophe. It was hosted by Tony Robinson, who was Baldric in Blackadder. And he'd essentially did all these 5 episodes that said, here are all discrete events that could have caused humans to become extinct and meant that we're not here at all today. So Earth global catastrophes. There was one like Snowball Earth. There was like meteor impact ones. And then the final one was one about the eruption of Toba volcano in Indonesia about 74,000 years ago. And they were talking about how there was a theory of the population bottleneck and how the volcanic winter caused people to, might have caused people to nearly die out because it was just so cold and so uninhabitable. And that aside, that theory has since been it's a bit contentious now. But my little brain was like, wow, like a volcanic eruption of that size, like that just absolutely blew my mind. And so I had this, I was very excited to learn about natural hazards. And so naturally in school just kind of flowed through, again, not enjoying maths, not enjoying science, but really enjoying geography. And kind of my journey to where I am now is, it was kind of a bit of an accident because I just sort of followed the subject I was naturally good at. I mean, since I was 4, I was working in the equestrian world, and I'd always said I'm going to be a dressage rider. I'm going to be a sports person. I'm going to do that for my career. And in year 11, I was doing really well at geography, and I was doing really well just in general. Um, and I kind of realised after spending some time working on a yard and realising that essentially trying to become a dressage rider was essentially surrendering myself to, free labour, because they get paid very little, very long hours, and with no guarantee that you're going to make anything of yourself. And so I kind of thought, this is probably not a good career choice. Probably should rethink this. And so a week before the UCAS deadline, I submitted applications to study geography, physical geography, at various universities, and I got a place at Leeds. And so I went there, nearly dropped out of first year because it was a big culture shock, because you kind of go from GCSEs and A levels to where you're in a small school, you work hard, and you can be, still fairly familiar. I went to my first year of uni, couldn't choose the modules that I was doing. And so I think I just scraped a 2-2. It was, and I nearly dropped out because I was like, I'm clearly not really good at this. And mum said, well, stick to it, because at the end of it, you'll have a degree. And if you don't want to do it, you can go and do something else, but you'll have a degree. And that's more powerful than like being a dropout. And I thought, okay, yeah, fair enough. But the minute we got more autonomy and could start choosing the modules we did, meant I could start choosing things that excited me. So like modules related to glaciers, the climate, hazards, all that sort of thing. And from that point on, I started to then think, this is why I was here. This is more like the geography that I absolutely loved at school. And as part of your final year, you do a research project. So you lead your own piece of research. And what I did was I went to Carlisle and collected some coarse repeatland, and to
Very close to me. I'm about
very close
15
to
miles
you.
away from Carlisle.
Very close to you. Oh, amazing. So what we were doing is I essentially was getting peat cores from a place called Walton Moss, and studying that or looking for sort of volcanic glass shards, or what we call cryptotephras. So you can't see them with the naked eye, but if you apply certain techniques to the peat material, you can extract these glass particles. And so my project was essentially going down the core. So the deeper you go, the older you go, and seeing what volcanic glass layers could be in there. And that whole leading a project of research, discovering new things, I just found absolutely amazing. And from that point on, and at least before then, I knew that I loved obviously volcanoes and natural hazards. And so from that point, I thought, I want to continue doing this. Essentially, this is just really fun. And so then I went on to do a master's by research in volcanology. So again, not really with the intention of doing a PhD. I kind of just thought, I'm interested in this. This sounds really cool. Durham's gorgeous. I got on really well with my supervisor the first time we met, and so I thought, yeah, I'm going to go do this. Decided, yeah, I still want to keep doing this, and so went into PhD. And it was kind of just through that sort of moving from one thing to the next that I just realised, I was like, I don't actually ever want to stop doing this. I absolutely love it, and I love the whole process, and the whole earth science is really what it feels like I was put on this earth to do. And
You
I
can
found sorry, I was going to say I found something that allowed me to write and also develop skills and develop mathematical and scientific skills that I at school didn't interest me and I wasn't good at. But as you learn on the job and you have context as to why they're important, it all of a sudden becomes a lot more interesting and you become a lot more keen to learn it. And so that's kind of how I ended up here. And I just feel grateful that I can now call it a job, because it feels like I turn up to work every day and have fun. It's very strange because it doesn't feel like work.
You can really tell that it's your passion because you literally light up when you speak about it. Yeah, it's really cool to see. It really is. And, just another thing you mentioned that I forgot to add on was the people who actually know, and the people who are really like adept at what they're doing and are really committed to their cause. They're not on social media making a noise about it, are they? They're
Yeah,
actually the people doing the work that people who know nothing about will go to social media and contest. It's very similar with my mentor, Richard Young. He's very adept in his field. He's been a psychologist for like 45 years. He knows what he's talking about. And then when you get to experience someone like him or yourself who's truly knowledgeable about what they do, and then you compare it to a meme you see online, yeah, it's different worlds. But yeah, I just wanted to
For sure.
highlight that because I forgot to mention it earlier. Yeah.
No, for sure, and I think that's I think where a lot of the problem lies as well is the fact that the people who should be given a voice and a platform are the people who are not there because they're busy in the weeds doing the work, and that's I guess the world we live in, and it's the issue with the world we live in.
That's why I want people like yourself on this podcast because that we do need more examples of people who are actually doing the thing to be talking about the thing, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, you're still young as well. What are your plans for like the next 10 years? What would you like to do?
I'd love to. I think for the next 10 years, the overriding theme is I just want to do work that matters. I don't want to become, I guess, an academic who just publishes some papers that, let's be honest, nobody really reads, and who just kind of becomes a case of just like, oh, I'm just on this treadmill that I'm just kind of doing my thing, you know. I don't want to be like that. I want to pursue topics and projects that will make a difference, and I want to make sure that they do make a difference. It's kind of hard to say where I'll be in the next 10 years because academia is such a dynamic field. So, you know, my contract here is for 4 years. And so where I'll be after that, I'm not too sure. But, you know, I just want to keep trying my best. And ultimately, I mean, up to now, doing my best and just trying to do the best work I can and really caring has got me to where I am now, which feels surreal in itself. And so I just think if there ever comes a point where I'm doing my very, very best and it's not good enough and it's not getting me anywhere, then that might be a sign for things to change. But I don't want to ever feel like I left stuff on the table. I don't want to ever feel like I remember when I was applying to postdocs, people were saying because a lot of rejections, of course, when you're applying to jobs. People saying how do you keep going? And I just thought, well, I don't. I love science. I know that I love science. I know that I love my job and I love studying the earth and studying how it works. And so if I was to then take up like a job that didn't fulfill that part of me, and I didn't know, I knew in my heart that I hadn't given it a good go, and really tried to get a job, then I think I wouldn't be able to live with myself. And so I think, as to now, there hasn't ever been a point where I've thought, you know what, I'm doing enough and it's still not enough. It's always been the case of, no, there's more on the table. There's more that I can do. And so it's been pursuing that's helped. So in 10 years time, I just hope that I've made at least a positive contribution to the field and that I'm known for doing something that's valuable. That's my ultimate goal.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. My next question is, what's been the most difficult thing, or is there any points along the journey to getting to where you are that have been, you know, really tested you or been painful times or anything like that?
So many, so many. How much time have we got? Um, yeah, I think academia and science in itself is a very difficult, very cutthroat world, and I think it can be easy. Of course, there's so much to be grateful for in my journey, and I really do stand on the shoulders of giants. I've had so many incredible mentors and people who have ultimately shaped who I am today, and who have given me their time and their wisdom and their knowledge. Um, but of course, there's the hard times that happen fairly frequently. So, for example, manuscript rejections are never fun, you know, because you put your work in your life into writing a paper that you think is solid. Your co-authors think it's good, and then reviews are often anonymous, and so you can get a review back where you don't know who's written it, and they've just essentially torn you to pieces. Sometimes for things that aren't particularly valid, and you kind of think that's a bit unfair, that's a bit silly. So that can be a bit soul destroying because you think I've ploughed so much time and effort into this and somebody's just disregarded it. Coming to the end of a PhD was more difficult, not necessarily because the work itself was difficult, it was more just the uncertainty. Because in that time where I didn't have a job lined up, you know, you come into the end, you kind of feel like you're ready to move on because you spent so much time on this project, but equally you don't know where you're going to go next. And that can be quite stressful, especially when I was on holiday in March, and I hadn't had any sort of indication of where I was going yet, and I got 4 rejections back to back, while I was away, and I just thought, this is insane. Like, this is just ridiculous. And so having that uncertainty and knowing that you have a lot to give in the industry and not being able to break through that has been quite difficult. Was quite difficult because it was almost like you wanted to scream, "Can you not just see how much I care about this? I want to work." But then that, it's a classic case of patience. Just patience, keep plugging away, and eventually what's meant for you will come to you.
Yeah.
And I guess in terms of other sort of personal challenges, I mean, work aside, of course, when we go through any big journey in life, there are always speed bumps along the way, right? I mean, my parents separated when I was back in 20, I think it was 2011 or so. And so there was kind of dealing with that, and then a lot of sort of family related things that have kind of that were ripples of that. Of course, you have kind of like, as you're growing, you alluded to the fact I'm still quite young, and so you kind of have all the difficulties of growing up, and you have breakups and you have all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Well, you must have only been, what, 13 at the time? 12,
Yeah,
13?
yeah, I was still very young, yeah. And I think one thing, I guess, in the sake of full transparency, one thing that I still struggle with now is in the least cliche way possible, feeling like I'm not doing enough, and that feeling of feeling I'm not doing enough, and always holding myself to a standard that's unreasonably high, has led me to overdoing things quite a lot. Because I mentioned at the start as well, I'm a CrossFit athlete, and so I really struggle to let one thing drop slightly if another thing has to take priority. I will just try and do both at 100%. And that has led me to some very sort of difficult periods because that has often manifested in my relationship with food. And so when I was about 16, I was on the sort of boundary of anorexia. And even though now I haven't got down to that point recently, I still have issues with food and over restriction and over. Whenever I feel out of control, I resort to controlling food as a means to do that. And I had a phase at the sort of beginning of 2023 where I had massively overdone it, and I was very, very underweight, very overtrained, and just it was concerning how I looked. And I'm not going to say I'm out of the woods yet by any stretch because I still have you have kind of relapse phases, don't you, where you let bad habits kick in a bit more than others. But it's something that I'm kind of actively now working on and can be aware of, which feels a lot more than it used to be, where it just used to be blindly just I can do everything, nothing is standing in my way. Um, and to see, yeah, that's something that is, I guess, ongoing. And I think there's in anybody who has big aspirations and equally wants to do things well, it's really hard to not want to do everything 100% and convince yourself that you can.
I can only imagine. Thank you so much for sharing that so deeply. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
No, thank you for giving me the space to talk about it. I think it's important. I think I've found great comfort in hearing people who I admire talk about things that they've struggled with, because often you kind of feel very detached from those people who you look up to and you think they look like they're not struggling, they look fine. And almost hearing that they're saying, I've had my own struggles, it doesn't necessarily validate you and say, oh, it's okay that I'm struggling. It's more a case of I'm not a freak,
Yeah.
and I can still make things. If they can make things work in spite of the challenges they've faced, so can I. Rather than just giving you a chance to opportunity to say, well, and clearly it's just a problem. It's using it proactively, and I think
Yeah, we need to empower being human, and that's one of the biggest aspects of being
yes.
human is all of the suffering we go through, right?
Yes, I love that empowering you to be human, because it's we are just all transitioning to be more like robots, or at least we're led to think the more robotic we are, the better our life will be, and I just don't think that's the case at all.
Neither do I. The more we turn away from that, the more we end up suffering in other areas, don't we? Like you say, because, and yeah, now with how society is and everything, but I don't think anything you said there was cliche whatsoever. And again, it's so easy to look at someone on the outside, isn't it? And be like, wow, they have got their shit together. They're doing all of these things, but all of us have something that we're dealing with, don't we? And
Yeah.
anyone who probably says they don't, as they're, they're maybe not facing it just yet, and that's
Yeah.
okay. But yeah,
Yeah, and sometimes as well, you'll find I've found for myself actually the time that it's looked like I've had my shit the most together. So, for example, if I'm ever, at work, things, papers are coming out and I'm achieving things, or if say if you look at pictures of me and I look most athletic, they're usually the times I'm struggling the most, and they're usually the times that it's like the time you have a six pack, for example. Some people you get the most compliments. People say, "Oh my god, you look amazing! Wow." And actually, often that's when I'm at my leanest, is when I'm in my darkest place and when I'm in my most reclusive place. And
and I feel it's almost a reflection of the outer inner, isn't it? Because when people are
yeah,
giving us surface level compliments, we're probably skimming at a surface level, aren't we? Because we're avoiding going deep, and the inner always matches the outer. Yeah, it's
yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's sometimes you kind of, there's always this very Britishness, isn't there? To whenever someone compliments you, you kind of want to say, oh no, stop, don't. But I think that there's something different to that versus when someone compliments you and you kind of feel like you're living a bit of a lie. Like if somebody
yeah.
compliments, say, oh my God, you're doing amazing, in my back of my mind, I'll be like, yes, but you still haven't had a period since October 2022, for example, because you've been overdoing it so much. And you can, as one example I'm still dealing with now, and it's, you kind of feel like, like I say, you're living a bit of a lie because you sort of think, well, maybe in one respect, I look like I'm smashing it, but actually there is a hidden cost to that I still need to figure out how to deal with. Um, and so, yeah, I think just hearing I think it's important for people to hear the hidden costs because, like you say, it makes you realize that everybody is human, and there's no real point envying people because that would mean taking all of them. And so it's more a case of it prompts you more to really celebrate their wins and just see them as what they are, opportunities and experiences and achievements of other people. Be happy for them rather than like, oh God, I wish I'd done that, because you don't realize what it took.
Yeah, absolutely. It draw inspiration, but never compare. Right? It's a very very like succinct piece of wisdom, but very very hard to put in action. Right? But I absolutely agree. I think every human should be striving towards that. We're all better together, but not better competing against each other unhealthily. Right?
For sure, yeah, and I imagine you of all people know this. You know the struggles and difficulties that you've gone through on your journey, and you know it's that if you were to compare yourself to other people, I imagine it would just absolutely eat you alive. Because I know that you're someone who just wants to do good, and you know you can't help the challenges you're given, but what you can do is like, and you've done this so beautifully, is making use of what you're given and making the best no matter what and showing up for yourself. And I think that's ultimately what we can do, and it's something that we can all take a huge amount of inspiration from.
Thank you. And while we're getting it out on the table, one of the first things I struggled with in propane was I never felt, even though you go through stages, I had the right people at the right times, but it's never felt more complete for me with the circle I now have that I have in propane. When Yusuf offered me that role, I was like, are you serious? You've got the right guy. But
Yeah,
anyway, it was the easiest yes ever. But for that first like 3 to 6 months, I was really ill, and I was surrounded by all of these people who were so talented and gifted and grounded and everything in what they did and achieving on such a high level. And there I was on this hospital bed, and whenever I get sick, my ego comes back out because you go back into your shell. It's a survival thing, right? We need a clean vessel to not be identified with the ego. If we were ill and didn't identify with the ego, we'd probably die. But anyway, being around all of those people and seeing everyone thrive and not being able to flourish in the way I wanted, yeah, it did really, uh, it fucked with me for a little while. But then I got healthy again, and it did transition into something. Whereas now it's like I'm around all these amazing people. I get to learn from all of them, and they hold me accountable to do better. And what an amazing space to be in with all of these people. I feel so lucky for it. I didn't even
yeah,
know it was possible to live a life like that.
yeah. And that's how you know you've reached just an incredible point where you just think you can't quite believe this is your life. I mean, I still have that, like, even, like, especially now, like, in the job that I am in, like, never did I think, even think back to the Christmas last year, like this time last year. I could never have seen myself here, ever. Like in Switzerland, working a postdoc that is on a project that excites me, working with a team of people that I am here, and also in Propane as well with the team. That when I first started at Propane, it was me, Johnny, and Yusuf. Like it
Yeah,
was,
that
there
that
was
was
just a few of
was it
us.
2019 or 2021?
2021, yeah,
Yeah, yeah,
it's on spring 2021,
yeah, yeah.
fresh out of COVID. So it's just it's. I think the fact as well, it's such a gift to have the awareness to be able to stop and actually appreciate that. Because imagine, I see people just almost like living their life day by day and not ever taking stock and just thinking, I'm so fucking grateful to be doing this and have that. Almost makes you want to cry. That sort of really deep gratitude for what you're doing and where you are. I just think a life without having the awareness to be able to experience that, I can't imagine. I feel so lucky to have it.
Yeah, I think a life without awareness isn't living, but because you miss out on the greatest things, don't you? Like
Yeah.
people almost treat presence as a byproduct when in actuality, everything is secondary to presence. But
Yes.
we've got it so backwards as a race, haven't we? But
Yeah.
yeah, it's quite peculiar.
It is. One thing that's amazing about Switzerland as well that I've come to love is the fact that, I've got the mountains on my doorstep and I've got these incredible environments, and it's just been such a godsend. And one reason I loved at home as well is like whenever you're feeling like, imagine you're the same, I feel I spend a lot of time in my own head and I have real tendency to overthink things that actually aren't that important, but just really becoming obsessive over little things. And almost going out into the mountains, going out into nature, and going out into these huge spaces, and just being made to feel like just a speck of nothing is so nice, and it's so grounding. And you just think, oh, actually, none of that actually matters. Even because training does that to an extent, but still, it's very you. It's still very you centric. We're almost being put into the concept on the context of the earth. Maybe that's why I love my job so much, because it's almost like I get a daily reminder of how small I am in regards to this system and to geological time as well. We've been around for not even a speck of time, really. And so that constant reminder, it just makes you realize that your problems and your obsessions are actually, they're not massive. They don't last forever. And so it's such a lovely thing.
And I think that's why one of the reasons I harp on about mind identification so much is the less we are identified with mind, when we are humbled in that instance where we get those moments where we get to see that we're not as significant as we thought we were. That with the right level of awareness can be a beautiful thing, and it's very freeing, and it allows you to live your life more freely, doesn't it? To go
Yes.
into everything with less attachment and less expectation. If someone's completely identified with mind, then that is the most soul destroying, crushing thing ever, because they just get to take on more of why life sucks and why everything's unfair, right? So yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. Would you say those 4 rejections you got, are you really glad that you were rejected by all of them now
One
that you're in
hundred percent,
Switzerland?
100%. I mean, I'll caveat and say there were way more than four. That was just four in the space
Yeah.
of in the
Yeah.
space of about a week. Yeah, there were absolutely loads. I mean, I was actually offered a job in South Korea
Yeah. I
last
remember. I
December.
remember.
Yeah, I was sat at Christmas dinner last year, discussing. I got the offer on Christmas Eve, and so I was sat there on Christmas Day debating with my family whether to go or not. And I think I remember at the time actually thinking, I don't think this is it. I think there's something out there for me, because it felt like a huge upheaval of my life. I hold family very dear, and I hold my where I'm from very dearly too. And it felt like the whole thing of moving halfway across the world all added up. I just thought, is that a step too far? I think there's more out there for me. I think I can do better than this. Not in a way of being like I am just the bee's knees. It wasn't that. It was just a case of, I think I don't want to take this for just because, I don't know what else I'm going to get. It's like you say, well, why did you stay with that toxic relationship? And it's like, well, I didn't think I'd get. I thought it was the best I was going to get. I didn't want to take the job and move my entire life across the world for that reason of, well, it's a job, so I best just take it. And I'm so glad that I've put my faith in that now, because really, the safe option would have been to just take it and follow it through and do it. But safe doesn't always, it doesn't bring us ultimately what we want, or at least a lot of the time it doesn't. And I'm just so glad I chose not to play safe and took a risk and thought, no, I'm going to wait because there's something else out there. I'm really, really glad I did that.
I'm glad you did too, because we need that combination of we need to be in a safe place so we can take calculated risks, don't we?
Yeah.
But we don't want too much of one or the other. So yeah, no, I'm
Yeah,
so
yeah.
glad you did too. Do you find as well having a scientific mind, a scientific approach to life? Does that ever make you overly cautious in certain ways, or do you ever get lost in analysis, or when is it helpful and when isn't it? I guess is a better question.
I love this question. When it's helpful, I think is when I consider it a real strength in terms of when I'm considering constructing an opinion. My view tends to be I have opinions, but not all of them are valid or even like well informed, and some of them are actually quite stupid. And so no, I don't have the right, or at least I don't have the entitlement to share everything I think. But when it comes to constructing an opinion that I do care about, I actually, before I'll say anything, my scientist in me goes, you need to consider all points of view before you actually even air this. And I will always be more cautious about sharing any opinion in public because I just think it's not, I want to come across in a way that's with integrity. And, and I also, one thing that science teaches you is that there's always an alternative. There's always a B option. It's never a case of black and white, this or that. And so that's kind of where I guess it's helpful. Where it's not helpful, I think, is that obsession with the minutiae. And also, I think it's an industry that is very strange in how it works, and it does very actively favour those who work very, very hard, and it favours, and it's a very rejection heavy culture. So, for example, you know, the more papers you publish, the more you do, the more successful you'll be. That's just the way it is. It's very much a meritocracy in science. Um, and as well as, you know, the way peer review works, for example, the way your work is assessed is not always that good, and it does really lend to feeling like you're never quite enough and never doing enough and never good enough because there's always more you could be doing. And you know, it's like you may be resting and you think, yeah, but that manuscript isn't going to write itself. What if my competitors are doing that? You know, and it's that classic Hormozy-esque sort of mentality of no one cares, just work harder. And I think in a lot of senses that can be a good thing because it pushes you beyond the limits that you do set yourself, and it allows you to stand out. But equally, when you need to rest, but that's ingrained in your mind, it can be very hard to take a step back.
Absolutely. And like, without going into hustle culture too much, that can be the most toxic approach to life ever, can't it?
Yeah,
Nobody cares, so I shouldn't care about anybody. So all I should do is work, and so
yeah,
should you. Yeah.
yes, yeah,
You know, one thing I really, really, one of the 100 things I could list, but speaking to people like yourself, being around people like you, it makes me want to truly be able to communicate the things I'm passionate about and learn about them as much as possible so I can then um, be of better use to other people with those things. You know, I want to be as articulate and knowledgeable as possible, not for, not to reach some pinnacle, but to just truly feel like I'm thriving in that thing. Because if I don't feel like I'm giving it my all, even though we've appreciated and highlighted there's caveats to that, yeah, you all just encourage me to go into it so much deeper. So I really
yeah.
thank you for that.
The inspiration works both ways, and I think that's one thing that maybe I need to work on in the future is having that almost being unapologetic at sharing what I have. Because what's the point in doing all this work and doing all this learning if you then can't share it? Because I've always tried to gatekeep a lot of my life as well. I've tended to always be like, you know, trying to stay a bit more aloof, and it's just like, don't share too much, just keep it to yourself. And I think it's something I need to get better at, especially if I want to have the impact that I know I want to, is not be apologetic about talking about what I like and what I've learned and interests me and what I think is important. And rather than just be confined to, sorry, I just went off on a tangent there.
No,
Like,
you didn't at all. No,
no,
it's really relevant. And
it's, yeah, but it's that sort of feeling of just like when you're talking to somebody and you just get carried away and you light up. I always feel a really compulsive need to just like apologize to them and say, "Oh, I'll stop. Sorry, you know, I'll shut up now." You know, and it's like it resisting the urge to do that and taking up more space in terms of just sharing knowledge. 'Cause it's not like I'm saying, "Let's all sit and talk about me for 5 minutes." You know, it's almost like I want to share with you what I've learned, because I think it can help you too.
You've done that perfectly this past hour, and I really hope you do it more. And
Thank
it's going
you.
to be one of my next questions as well, is more people need to know about you and the work you do. Your website is alicerpaine.com
Yes.
// research. I'll leave all of the comments in the bio and everything so people can find you and your work as
Thank
well.
you. Thank you. I'm also on I'm on Blue Sky as well. I put a lot of my sciencey stuff on Blue Sky. My Instagram tends to be more personal, so that tends to be if you just want some pictures of mountains. While Alice's Adventures in Switzerland, my Instagram has turned into. So work-wise, yeah, alicrpaine.com or Blue Sky. I tend to be where it's found. And equally, there'll be as the project develops while I'm here in Basel, we'll be posting more about the findings that we have from our project in Southwest Asia. So it might be worth following along with that too. So if you Google, the Mitra project, we'll have a website up and running very soon, so you can keep track there as well.
This has been really expansive for me. Thank you so much. And I look forward to doing this again with you very soon.
Well, the pleasure's all mine, Johnny. Honestly, thank you so much for giving me this platform to talk about my journey and talk about my career. It has been a true pleasure, and I do hope we get to do it again, because you're such a wonderful podcast host, and I could sit and talk to you for hours.
Thank you. Yeah, the feeling's absolutely mutual. I'm still pretty green in my interviewing ability, but yeah, thank you for coming on and allowing me to improve on that. With everything else as well. We filmed this on the 12th of December 24. You're probably seeing this in mid-January, everybody, just so if you're wondering the timeline of this. But yeah, Alice, I hope you have an amazing day. And yeah, I really look forward to having you on again soon. And I will see you in the Propane community.
Yes, for sure. I mean, maybe the next time we chat, we can talk about the community stuff. It feels like something we've not touched on yet. So
that'd be awesome. I'd love to pick your brains on how to keep a community and how to nurture that and make it grow. I think that'd be an awesome talking point. Yeah.
Let's do it then. Part 2 coming 2025.
Awesome. Thank you, Alice. I hope you have an amazing day.
Thank you so much, Johnny. Speak to you soon.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.